Moscow, 14th October 1964. The Soviet Union's most powerful organ, the Presidium of the Central Committee, is holding a meeting. At the center of the scene is Nikita Khrushchev, the boisterous, undisputed leader of a superpower. A motion is put to a vote. All in favor of Comrade Khrushchev's retirement are asked to raise their hands. Hands go up around the green baize table, almost in unison. It is a quiet, bloodless coup. In a country accustomed to leaders ruling until death, this vote is almost an unprecedented event. But it is no spontaneous revolt. It is the final, calculated move in a months-long conspiracy to remove the most powerful man in the Soviet Union. One thing you should know about Khrushchev is that he wasn't particularly careful about what he let other people know, and his opponents used that to their advantage. This is roughly the equivalent of using the internet today without NordVPN. Now at this point, you probably all know what a VPN is. When you browse the internet, a VPN will protect you from viruses and hide your data from hackers and whoever else might want to find out what you're doing on the internet. Additionally, it allows you to access content locked to specific regions on services such as Netflix. And NordVPN provides all that, and as one of the fastest VPNs on the planet, you won't have to deal with frustrating buffering or slow speeds while staying protected. Right now, you can get this premium service for less than the price of a cup of coffee a month. Head over to the link in the description or the pinned comment and sign up today. We begin our story 9 months prior to the vote in the frozen quiet of the Zavidovo hunting retreat, where Leonid Brezhnev and Nikolai Podgorny are taking a walk. Leonid Brezhnev was seen by many as a charismatic diplomat, a man who loved a good joke and avoided open conflict at all costs. Some considered him cautious, even timid, but this affable exterior concealed a lifetime of political savvy. He began his career not as a politician, but as an engineer metallurgist in Ukraine. Then came the 1930s and Stalin's Great Purge. As the old guard of the party was arrested and shot, a vast number of vacancies opened in the hierarchy. For ambitious young men like Brezhnev, it was a brutal but effective career ladder. When the Second World War broke out, he joined the military and was able to work his way up to the rank of general. But the most pivotal moment of his life came after the war, in a devastated Ukraine. It was there that he came under the direct patronage of the Republic's new master, Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev saw in Brezhnev a younger version of himself, energetic, loyal, and reliable. He took Brezhnev under his wing, promoting him everywhere he could. When Khrushchev came to rule over the entire Soviet Union in the mid-1950s, he appointed Brezhnev to oversee 2 of his most important projects, the Virgin Lands campaign and the construction of the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Brezhnev succeeded in both, earning Khrushchev's absolute trust. His partner in this fateful walk was Nikolai Podgorny. His career path mirrored Brezhnev's, an engineering background, a steady climb up the regional party ladder. But where Brezhnev worked with steel, Podgorny was a specialist in sugar. His career, however, was nearly destroyed by a moment of profound cowardice during the war. Tasked with evacuating sugar factories from the advancing German army, Podgorny was terrified of being caught under fire. He faked his report, claiming he had overseen the work when he had never left the safety of his office. When the lie was exposed, he was unceremoniously fired by Anastas Mikoyan. His career was over. But it was Nikita Khrushchev who saved him. Seeing a useful, if flawed, subordinate, Khrushchev brought him back from disgrace, rehabilitated him, and eventually promoted him to become the head of the entire Ukrainian Communist Party. Like Brezhnev, Podgorny owed his entire political existence to his patron. These were the core members of the Ukrainian clan, men bound to Khrushchev by decades of loyalty, a loyalty that was about to be broken. They saw Khrushchev's chaotic reorganizations not just as poor leadership, but as an existential threat, and by early 1964, they knew they were not alone in their resentment. Khrushchev's ambitious economic promises had failed, leading to humiliating food shortages and debacles like the infamous Ryazan miracle, where an entire region's livestock was slaughtered to meet impossible meat production targets. On the world stage, he had brought the planet to the absolute brink of nuclear annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a reckless gamble that had terrified even his closest colleagues and ended in what many saw as a humiliation. The discontent with Khrushchev had reached a boiling point across much of the Soviet political elite, and they sensed the time was finally ripe to act. Khrushchev himself provided the perfect opportunity. He was constantly traveling, absent from the levers of power in Moscow for a staggering 135 days in the first 9 months of 1964 alone. The Kremlin was a ship with an absent captain, leaving the crew ample time and space to plot a mutiny. The political climate was ripe. The opportunity was there. For Brezhnev and Podgorny, the risk of acting had finally become smaller than the risk of doing nothing. In that moment, the conspiracy was born. Their next step would be to get the rest of the Soviet elite on board. Their first and most important target was Alexander Shelepin. Shelepin was the voice of the Communist Youth League, and, as with Brezhnev and Podgorny, he was a creature of Khrushchev's own making. In the years after Stalin's death, Khrushchev saw Shelepin not just as a subordinate, but as a weapon. He called him a young and daring machine. Fueled by this trust, Shelepin's rise to power was meteoric. First, Khrushchev made him the head of the Komsomol, the powerful Communist Youth League. From there, he was promoted to one of the most sensitive posts in the state, chairman of the KGB. Finally, as if that weren't enough, Khrushchev created a new super agency specifically for him, the Committee of Party State Control, giving him immense authority over the entire state and party apparatus. But with such an incredible concentration of power, a dangerous transformation occurred. He began to see himself no longer as Khrushchev's instrument, but his equal. So when Brezhnev and Podgorny came to him, they were unlocking a cage. For Shelepin, this wasn't about restoring stability or correcting policy. It was about ambition. It was about seizing the opportunity that Khrushchev himself had created. Getting Alexander Shelepin on their side automatically granted them another valuable ally, Shelepin's protégé and the current chairman of the KGB, Vladimir Semichastny. Semichastny was not a plotter by nature. He was a practical man who understood power. He saw the forces gathering around Brezhnev, Podgorny, and his own mentor, Shelepin, and recognized them for what they were, an unstoppable political force. He knew it would be futile to stand in its way. With the core of the conspiracy forged, the next months were spent winning over the discontented in quiet offices, private dachas, and hunting lodges across the vast Soviet Union. And by autumn 1964, the conspirators had many allies at both the regional and the federal level. Now the conspirators only had to wait for the right moment, which Khrushchev would soon provide. Towards the end of a routine meeting, he casually scanned the room. Noticing that many of his colleagues were not present, he concluded that it was time to give way to the young at the next party congress, which would be held within the next 6 to 12 months. Knowing that they will soon be replaced unless they act fast, the conspirators found themselves in a race against time to get rid of Khrushchev. Fortunately for them, a few days after making this statement, Khrushchev went on holiday to Georgia. While Brezhnev had initially proposed physically getting rid of Khrushchev by either poisoning him or staging a plane crash, Semichastny insisted on using legal methods which the Soviet constitution provided. He was to be voted out of power. In the meantime, in the warmth of his southern retreat, Khrushchev was tipped off about the conspiracy. Anastas Mikoyan, one of Khrushchev's few remaining friends in the Central Committee, was informed about the conspiracy by one of the conspirators' bodyguards and rushed to Georgia to warn Khrushchev. Khrushchev's reaction was one of pure disbelief. His self-confidence was absolute. He was the man who had stared down Stalin's ghost, the leader of a superpower that had put the first man in space. He simply could not conceive that the loyal circle he had created would ever dare to move against him. The warning was not investigated. It was ignored, and this inaction was his fatal mistake. Back in Moscow, the KGB, under Semichastny's control, knew that Mikoyan had flown to Georgia. The conspirators waited, terrified for the axe to fall. But the order for their arrest never came. Instead, Khrushchev was carrying on as if nothing had happened. October 12th, everything was ready. The Central Committee members had been secretly summoned to Moscow on false pretenses. The military was neutralized. Now only one thing remained: to lure the bear back to his den. They had concocted their legend, a fake emergency. They would claim that Khrushchev's recent notes on agriculture and the new economic plan were so confusing that no one could make sense of them, and an urgent presidium meeting was required before the upcoming plenum. The task of making the call fell to the conspiracy's leader, Leonid Brezhnev. And he was terrified. He was a cautious bureaucrat, not a revolutionary, and the reality of the treason he was about to commit was overwhelming. He stalled. He made excuses. The others would not let him back down. They knew this was the point of no return. Brezhnev, his voice tight with nerves, laid out the flimsy excuse. Khrushchev initially refused, saying the issues could wait. But Brezhnev pressed, finally delivering the ultimatum they had agreed upon. If Khrushchev did not return, the Presidium would meet and decide the issues without him. And with that, the tone changed. Khrushchev finally understood that something was deeply wrong. He told Brezhnev he would fly back the next day. The call was over. The first secretary was returning. As his plane descended into Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev still believed he held some cards. He was angry, he was suspicious, but he was still the first secretary, the leader of a superpower, returning to his capital to confront and discipline his unruly subordinates. He expected a tense reception, but a reception nonetheless. He was not prepared for what awaited him. The tarmac was a void. His comrades, his inner circle, his so-called friends, none of them were there. Only one man had come to meet him, not as a subordinate welcoming his leader, but as a warden receiving his charge. From the airport, Khrushchev was escorted directly to the Kremlin. He entered the Presidium's Oval Hall to find the leadership waiting. The chairman's seat had been left empty, but out of habit, Khrushchev briskly walked to it and sat down. What followed was not a meeting, but a 5-hour political execution. The first blow was struck by Leonid Brezhnev. He stated that the Presidium had been meeting without him and concluded that it was no longer possible to work with Khrushchev. He accused him of consulting no one, of a flawed work style, and of creating a terrible atmosphere within the leadership. Then, the floodgates opened as the men rose to denounce him. The accusations became a torrent of grievances. He was charged with cronyism, overestimating successes while ignoring failures, recklessly provoking the Cuban Missile Crisis, and developing his own cult of personality. When the old leader tried to argue, he was harshly silenced. With the verdict all but delivered, it was decided to convene a plenum of the Central Committee to formalize the decision. There was no negotiation. The conspirators demanded everything. The floor was then given to Khrushchev for a last word. He acknowledged some criticisms but reminded them that all major decisions had been made collectively. Then, in a moment of bitter irony, he spoke of the very meeting that was deposing him. "I rejoice," he said, "that the party has finally grown up and can control any man. You gathered and are smearing me with filth, and I cannot object." He thanked them for the opportunity to simply resign, a quiet acknowledgement that he might have feared a much worse fate. The old man who had fought his way up from the coal mines of the Donbass to become one of the most powerful men in the world was finally and completely broken. The vote to accept his resignation for reasons of age and health was swift and unanimous. Leonid Brezhnev was named the new first secretary. The Khrushchev era was over. Overnight, Khrushchev's name was erased from the media. While the new leadership promised an end to his chaotic reforms, the old leader was sent into a quiet, forgotten retirement. He would spend his final years reflecting on his turbulent career and his own unique, bloodless downfall, passing away in 1971.